Yeah, you got it. Yeah. Yeah, good to see you. Well, good to see you too. Yeah, we did a little bit of a pivot with our location because there's voting going on in our usual programming space. So it's a little cozy in here, but we're glad that you've all come. This is the third in a series on various mental health issues from Wedgwood Christian Services.
Mhm.
And this is Jacklyn, who is presenting on
Hi.
trauma-informed parenting. Also, we live stream this evening, but they won't be getting any audience members or questions on their live stream with the recording. So that's that.
Awesome. Thank you. Nice little intimate group. I love it. Well, yes, hello. As already said, my name is Jacklyn. I'm from Wedgwood Christian Services. I specialize in trauma for youth and adolescents, and I also teach a trauma-informed parenting class to caregivers, and that's through Zoom. So let's get started. So today we're just going to be explaining, I'm just going to be explaining a little bit about what trauma is, the effects of trauma on the brain and on the body and its symptoms, the feelings and behaviors that can be brought up through trauma, and how to build a safe space for the youth in your care. So the first thing is defining a traumatic experience. A lot of people now talk about traumatic experiences. It's something that we hear more often being said. But a traumatic experience is defined as a actual or threatened event. It can be a death, it can be a car crash, something that threatens the life of the child, something that threatens the life of their family members, or it could be perceived as a threat. The intense physical effects that we can have through trauma, we could have intense heart rate, you could feel rapid heart rate, rapid breathing, could get dizziness, loss of bladder or bowel control. There's a lot of different physiological effects that we say surrounding trauma in the body and how stress controls the body. So we have different types of trauma. We have acute trauma. That is the experience that maybe only happens one time, which is acute. It's not prolonged. That could be a car crash. It could be like an illness that is severe. There's also chronic trauma experiences, and these are the experiences that happen over time throughout years, weeks, months, and it affects the brain to an important state of development, and affects the psychological parts of the brain. We also have neglect. That is where a parent or caregiver fails to comply to the needs of the kid in their child care. So the basic needs, housing, food, shelter, but also the emotional needs, love, safety, guidance, other things like that. So trauma affects the brain in many different ways, but there are three main impactful ways that trauma can affect the brain, especially starting at the age of development, so at infancy going forward. So what we know about the brain is it's not fully developed until about the age of 25 for females, maybe a little longer for males, 27 about. And there's three main areas of the brain. So there's the brainstem. We call that the reptilian brain. If we look at a hand, it's like the arm of the model, and that controls our basic extremities, basic movements such as heart rate, breathing, blinking, the things that we don't necessarily think about that are just automatic. After that, we have the limbic system. The limbic system contains our threat detection. It contains our memories. So we have a point in our brain called the amygdala, which I like to consider the fire alarm of the brain. It detects when there is danger present, danger around. For example, if we were here and the fire alarm went off, we would all get up and leave. We wouldn't just sit here trying to problem solve what to do. After the amygdala goes off, it then sends a message to the hippocampus, which is our memory storage. So the amygdala goes off as this is unsafe. The hippocampus responds and stores that memory for later use. So it stores the traumatic event, the stressful event as stressful, even down the line. Once that happens, it all works together. we show that the prefrontal cortex actually turns off. This is like a light switch happening in your brain. The prefrontal cortex works on emotional control, problem solving, staying calm, emotional reasoning, all that stuff that probably isn't fully developed, like we said, until 25 or 27. But when we experience trauma or high stress, a traumatic event, that actually turns off in the brain, which is why we see an outburst of behaviors, an outburst of anxiety and mental health problems, because the hippocampus and amygdala are saying, nope, we can't comprehend this. All we can do right now is fight, flight, freeze, or a new one called fawn, which is actually that people-pleasing response.
It's what?
Fawn,
Fawn talk?
like a deer, yeah.
Yeah. What did you say that?
It's like the people-pleasing. So, yeah, more like I'm going to comply to you to stay out of danger. So if I were to, this might go off, but yeah, if I were to like say like, hey, so-and-so, can I borrow your car for a little bit? Which this is an extreme, but you don't want them to borrow your car, but you also don't want someone to be mad at you. You just be like, okay, sure. Like kind of hand it over because you want to keep the peace. You want to kind of go off and go past your boundaries to not have people go to the extreme. So I do have a little video that actually explains it a little better in fun terms I show to my kiddos all the time. So we'll watch a little bit of this. We won't watch the whole thing. I'll let you know when to stop it. If there's sound, maybe there's... Should have checked. If not, that's okay. If not, no problem. Hello.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Find the sound.
Always some technical difficulties. Can't be a presentation without them, right? That's okay. We can skip it if we need to. It's okay. We can skip it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Slide.
Basically what this is saying in terms of the video, I can just kind of summarize it, is we have an upstairs brain and a downstairs brain. The upstairs brain controls our emotional reasoning, it controls our calming, our problem solving, our focus, and it has little guys that have each one. And the downstairs brain controls our fear reaction, it controls our anger reaction. So we have two people in this video that they explained. There is Alerting Annie, which would be our amygdala, and then there's Big Boss Bob, who acts as the hippocampus. When there's a threat or when there is danger, Big Boss Alerting Annie tells Big Boss Bob that something's happening, we are in danger, and Big Boss Bob essentially like shuts off the staircase to the brain. So we can't go upstairs, we can't emotionally stay calm, we can't problem solve. The only way we're gonna react is with that fear, with that flight, with the fight reaction. So that's the summarize of the video, but that's okay. So the effects of trauma, we see a lot of different effects of trauma in many different ways. It can look different for each and every child, for each and every person. But the main symptoms that we see that interfere with a healthy development of a child is first the ability to trust others. We see a lot of what we call hypervigilance. So that is always being on the lookout for danger, unable to trust those around you because you're not sure if they're safe, always that kind of, I gotta stay on alert for what's happening response. The next one here is our sense of personal safety. Your child's sense of personal safety, us as caregivers, if we experience trauma or secondary trauma, our personal safety, and gets threatened as we experience a traumatic event. All of a sudden, nothing seems safe because your hippocampus, the memory storage, is telling you this was dangerous once, it's gonna be dangerous again. Ability to manage emotions. And we see a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of frustration and anger, even a lot of depression coming out from children and adolescents who have experienced trauma. They, again, can't process their emotions already, and once we add that life-threatening or perceived life-threatening event in the mix, then it shuts down our storage and our ability, so we see a lot of dysregulated emotions. Trauma affects our ability to navigate and adjust to the changes. That's where our problem solving comes from. So we often see, especially young children who have a lot of difficulties with transitions in school. They can't go from recess to math time just like that, like the other kids. We can't adjust to that change. We can't problem solve it and stay flexible. That's where we see meltdowns or high anxiety or tantrums. Lastly is our physical and emotional responses. Children who experience trauma often get misdiagnosed as ADHD. We see the hypervigilance response heighten, so we can't focus because we're constantly looking out what's going to get me next. We also, though, see chronic headaches because the stress has to come out somewhere, so it comes out physically. We see lots of stomach aches. As we get older, that we might experience chronic pain in our bodies. So we teach lots of different techniques to alleviate that physical pain, but also spot it in order to recognize it as a trauma symptom or as a PTSD symptom in order to kind of mitigate those effects. Awesome, thank you. I believe there's one other video, but we can skip it too. So a child's reaction to trauma can vary very much. So one person might experience a car crash and be totally fine. Another person might experience a car crash, or another child might experience a car crash, and that is the traumatic event for them. We all perceive things differently, and it's not just perceive of life, it's the supports that we have in order to react to trauma. So the child's age and developmental stage is a big part of being able to process trauma. When we're little, when we're infants and we don't have our hierarchy of needs being met, especially with neglect, then our brain doesn't develop, or it develops differently from others. So age, especially too in like toddler and young adult, when we can't process as much as what's going on around the world around us, plays a big factor. The temperament of the child. If a child is already, we see some anxiety symptoms already, or we see some distress signals when they're younger, or they can't handle stress as well, even from a young stage, then we see more of that anxiety and PTSD symptoms come about. We also see perception of the danger faced as being different. Like I said, for one person, that car crash might not have been a big deal. Yeah, maybe I hit the front of the seat, but it was okay, no one was hurt. And then for the other kid, that car crash was always on their mind 24/7. And that too is how, again, how we perceive of like, mom could have gotten hurt, I could have died. So it's all about their perception of everyone's okay versus, oh, we could have gotten really hurt in this, we're gonna keep ruminating about it. The trauma history, the cumulative effects of trauma, that's where we see the more traumatic instances that a person has with that chronic trauma, the more that they're most likely to develop those PTSD symptoms, because there is no stress relief. There is always that stress response activated in the child. So that's going to heighten the response later on. And the adversities faced following the trauma. So if a child or adolescent has a great support group, for example, if they can get counseling right away, if they have a mom and dad or caregivers who will say, protect them and say everything's okay, if they have a church following, those support groups are what matters most in the development or non-development of those PTSD symptoms. The more support that a child has, the less likely they are to develop those symptoms. Yep. So when is PTSD diagnosed officially? So PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, I'm sure we all know. So a person displays severe traumatic stress reactions. We see trouble sleeping, trouble eating, difficulties concentrating, those psychological effects, high anxiety and depression, physiological headaches, stomach aches, things like that. When they display those for 6 months or more, that's when we diagnose that PTSD diagnosis. People will often look for the impairments of the child. So they can't focus in school, so they're getting bad grades, or they can't even go to school, they're so anxious about it. Or at home, I'm having trouble managing him or her to get chores done, or things like that. We look for those physical impairments that delay kind of chores or work and things like that. When we look at stress and trauma, as well as the feelings and behaviors that PTSD may represent, I always use this lovely model here, which I like to call, it is called the window of tolerance. It's also kind of used as a subjective units, like the stress scale. So when we look at our window of tolerance, we have the inside window. I'm trying not to block it, but we have the inside window where we can manage stress. It might be higher, it might be a little lower, but we're still in our window where we can stay calm, we can problem solve, we can experience the stress, but then come down to a level where we're okay again. When trauma occurs, especially that chronic trauma, we see the window shrink a significant amount, where the child or adolescent can no longer handle as much without going above or below. If we go above, we call that a hyper aroused response. Hyper, when we think of that, we think more energy, and that's exactly what it is when we experience stress. We use more energy to exhibit that stress. So this is where we see temper tantrums, outbursts, high anxiety, panic attacks. This is where that fight or flight kind of reaction comes in. It's involuntary, we can't control it. It's something where the brain says, hey, there's danger, I remember this being danger, and we're gonna react so we can protect. On the opposite scale, there's hypoarousal. So if hyper is high anxiety, hyper is high energy, hypo is that lower energy response. That's where we see depression symptoms, emotional numbing, where kids or even adolescents and adults can't identify the emotions that they're experiencing, or they can't experience any emotions that they report. We see lack of interest in activities that they used to do, wanting to kind of stay in bed all day. That's where that kind of freeze and fawn response comes in, because we don't use and we don't have as much energy throughout our reactions to high stress. We also see a lapse in time, or that mental fog that I know we all get on a very long day like I'm having. So arousal and reactivity, more specifically, this is the hyper-aroused response, that volcano response that we see. I like to call it a frustrato volcano in my counseling. What that may look like, as we already said, is on alert for danger, trouble concentrating, very quick to startle. So even if I hit this really loud, the kid might jump. When you're that is not a normal reaction to that, what's going on. Irritability and anger is a big one, and that's our body's way again to say, I feel threatened, so I need to attack back. We see the reckless and self-destructive behavior because that prefrontal cortex does turn off, so we feel more reckless. We're unable to think what's going to happen if I do this. We also see sleep or concentration problems because of that high anxiety response, because of what's going to happen next. What am I going to do during school tomorrow that might be a threat to me or might bring me high stress? Finally, in young children, it might be more intense temper tantrums or prolonged temper tantrums. So if we see those tantrums last for maybe even a half hour to an hour, when normally a kid might start calming down and being able to re-regulate, or we see the outburst reaction that doesn't fit to what occurred. So like we always say, don't cry over spilled milk. I don't know if a lot of you heard that, but this might look like spilled milk, but the kid has a full-blown like screaming, crying on the floor, throwing a fit tantrum for an hour. We see kind of that reaction. The intrusion and avoidance symptoms. If we see the hyperactivity, we also see the intrusion. I like to think of intrusion as a robber, which is why I have a little bank guy there. Robbers break into banks. We don't want them in there. They break into houses. We don't want them in there, just like our thoughts break into our minds. Intrusion is when those sights, sounds, smells, visuals come to our minds when we don't want them to, or comes to our child's minds when we don't want them to. That looks like flashbacks. That looks like you walk outside when the season changes and you can smell fall and it takes you back to that memory. In young children, this can look like repetitive and reenactment of play because they're trying to process and digest what they saw and what actually happened. That's a big sign of intrusion in young children. If they reenact and play, or if they ask questions about it in inappropriate times, it comes to their mind when they don't want it to and they're trying to process. We see avoidance as well. So avoiding the people, the places, the things, even the smells of what reminds them of the trauma. They don't want to go to school. They don't want to get in a car because they have those memories of that is where their scary event happened, or they avoid eating a certain food that they were eating during that point. We try not to have any thoughts, any feelings, any memories about the trauma whatsoever. If it gets brought up, the kid might have a temper tantrum, they might walk away. If a kid feels sad, they'll just try to push it away, because even those feelings are uncomfortable, we're not going to feel them anymore. We have a lot of different changes in our thoughts and mood, and our children have a lot of different changes in thoughts and mood. The first one could be trouble remembering the important events of the traumatic episodes or episode. That is because our brain has an amazing way to try to protect us, so it's just going to pretend like we didn't see it. It's still there, the body still responds, but all of a sudden they can't remember. And we might see this too in other reactions, that maybe a kid is supposed to remember an important thing at school, which we all know that kids say, I don't remember at school, but this is like, oh, remember that fun assembly you had today, and they just completely forgot. So it looks like those memory lapses. We have pulling away from activities and relationships that they used to enjoy. All of a sudden, your kid who loves soccer doesn't want to go to soccer anymore. They try to isolate themselves because the children feel that it's better to be by myself in this safe area where I feel comfortable rather than out in the world with the things that might hurt me. We see that their negative thoughts are kind of stuck in a pattern. We see a lot of self-blame with trauma. It was my fault. I should have done more. I should have protected this person, but we also see negative self-thoughts of I'm stupid, I'm dumb, because we're always at that stage trained to have and think of the negative. That's what's going to protect us. We're always trained to feel the fear because that's what's going to keep us safe. Oh, there's one more. Sorry. And yep, finally we have blaming ourselves for the bad things that happen. So this is with the negative thoughts, yes. But it's a very internal blame, and we can see it in many ways. So it comes out in our kids' emotions. We can see more depression. It comes out in the isolation that we see. But it is a very kind of intense blame that sticks with every part of their life. We call it kind of a core belief that they have, they take with them throughout all of their lives. So how do we build a safe space for our youth, for our adolescents that are in our care, for our own children? There's a lot of different things that you can do as a caregiver, as a teacher, as a mentor. And the first thing to remember is that what we as caregivers, as adults define as safe might not be their definition of safe. Might not be even a person who's experienced trauma's definition as safe. So remembering that physiologically and psychologically, we need to protect their version of safe and accept that for them can take us into the next chapters of building that safety tool. We remember that when children experience trauma and adolescents experience trauma, they lose all control. They don't have control of what's happening to them, what's happening around them, so we give them control back by offering choices, by allowing them to set up and have a schedule that they can follow, and maybe we pick one or two choices. What book would you like to read, this one or this one? They feel like they have more power in their environment, which allows to build safety. We set limits so the children don't feel overwhelmed or responsible for more than they can handle. We also pay attention to the developmental level of the child. We know that a 3-year-old can't handle 5 or 6 different tasks all at once. Go get your backpack, put your shoes on, eat breakfast. For children who has experienced trauma, that might be, okay, put your shoes on, get your socks on, get your shoes on. We'll tell you what to do next. We set limits. We don't give too many demands for a child who's experienced trauma because they can't process already. Add that event in there, and we give them less control over their experiences. We give the child some idea of what's going to happen in their future. This can be as simple as the scheduling of, okay, we are going to go to school, we're going to have snack time, math, recess, whatever, and then it's the end of the day, so they allow them to see what's going to happen. This for future, like later on, it might be setting expectations of, okay, we're going to go home, eat our dinner. Later on, we're going to go see a movie. We give them the lineup so they know what to expect, because uncertainty is unsafety. So finally, we have how to talk to a child if they're worried about other things happening to them, if they're worried about their own safety. So we have lots of different ways to talk to our children. The main one that we see with like toddlers and adolescents is getting down on their level so they feel safe, so they know we're not talking at them or talking with them in this experience. But we also want to make sure that we empathize with their emotions and with their responses. We don't want to push them away, say it's okay, you're overreacting. We want to empathize that I understand this is a stressful response for you. I understand what's going on, or I'm trying to understand, can you help me if you don't understand? We acknowledge their experiences. We acknowledge how they're feeling. Again, we never push it away. We say that I understand, or I know what has happened has caused you to experience fear. Let's talk about it instead of kind of pushing it back. We reassure them that they are safe. And this looks like reassurance at the time, but not over-promising. We can never promise that nothing bad is ever going to happen to them again. Unfortunately, that is not realistic, but we can promise I'm here for you right now, and you are in a safe space right now. I am going to be here when you get home from school. It's going to be okay. Things that we can reassure them about that are absolute. We are honest with them about what we know and don't know. There's a lot of things with trauma that nobody knows. Even I as a therapist still have questions, and I'm honest. I will, say in developmental terms, I don't know that right now, bud, but let's figure it out. Or what do you think about that? We're honest with them. We don't try to make up answers that we don't know. That just kind of fits in with the distrust of what's going on. And finally, we ask for help when needed, and we are their help. If a child displays PTSD symptoms, if we see symptoms that last longer than 6 months, you as a caregiver can reach out for help through Wedgwood or through other organizations. You are the advocate for your children. So that brings us to seeking support. Here at Wedgwood, we do offer therapy for children as young as about 3 or 4. We offer play therapy up to all walks of life. So We offer trauma therapy till about the age of 17, starting at age 5 to 17. We offer outpatient therapy from the ages of 3 or 4, like I said, up to 100, however long that they need us. And we do have different types of therapies. We have our outpatient, but we work with several different models: anxiety, depression, substance abuse, trauma-informed parenting. So we have a lot of variety. There are also volunteer points at Wedgwood. You can volunteer to do a lot of things. I always like to say, if you have like children in your care and you want to get them to learn more about what mental health therapy is, or learn about more of the resources, we can have them volunteer and get into it. It's always a fun thing to do. Then we have learn more with our experts. We can come out to the community. We can speak as I am today, or you can even ask for support or handouts from Wedgwood at any time as well. That, I believe, is it. Yep. Any and all questions? Yeah, thank you. Any questions about any of that? We do have resources and handouts in the back as well. Tip sheets,